So this is going to be, if I can make this work, this is a video I'm not going to talk through, which gives you a good feel of what went on in the room at the time.
We should have parachute deploy around Mach 1.7. The parachute is deployed. We are decelerating. T-chill has separated. We're found the ground. We're down to 90 meters per second at an altitude of 6.5 kilometers descending. Standing by for batch shell separation. We are in powered flight. We're at altitude of 1 kilometer descending. Standing by for sky crane. Sky crane has started. Touchdown confirmed. We're safe on Mars.
You got thumbnails.
So you have to remember, people have put a decade of their lives into doing this, and we've been through amazing ups and downs with people trying to cancel the mission back in 2007 and 8. The launch slip gave them another opportunity to try to cancel this. Problems with instruments, actuators, software, parachutes that wouldn't open. There's a lot of heart and soul in this of all the people that were involved. It was worth the celebration. It really was. Now this gentleman down here with the flag I got to tell you about. Miguel San Martin, he's from Argentina. He grew up in Argentina watching Apollo programs and said, I want to do that someday. He is the guidance, navigation, and control lead for MSL. He is hysterical because he is a very straight-laced, straight-faced. You don't see him smiling and laughing like this very often. So we're all running around the control room, you know, congratulating everybody, patting each other on the back. And I go up and I give Adam Stelzner, is the entry, descent, and landing lead here with his hand up, standing up. So I give him a big hug and we talk. And I go down and I grab Miguel and give him a big hug. And I said, that was absolutely amazing. You guys hit it on the entry point. Oh, by the way, we landed 250 meters away from where we thought we would with our entry point analysis. So I think that's pretty close. That's pretty close. Not bad after 350 miles. Now we're down to 250 meters. And I said, that was absolutely amazing, Miguel. You guys, it was right on. I just can't even believe how well this went. And he goes, yeah, he says. He's got a really thick Spanish accent. Yeah. He says, it was better than the simulations, better than the simulations. And then he stops, and he kind of gets straight-faced in, and he goes, we're going to have to work on those simulations. So never a moment's rest with him. Anyway. So where'd we go? That's where we went. Interesting little hole in the ground, frankly. It's the size of Delaware. So it's a big hole in the ground. You can see the mountain, Mount Sharp, in the middle of it. It's 3.5 kilometers high, 5-mile high mountain in the middle of this ancient crater. What's also interesting, if you look closely, there's a line that kind of runs top right, bottom left, right a little above the crater itself, where it's much smoother at the top than it is below that. That's called the dichotomy line. The northern hemisphere is much lower in like sea level kind of lower on Mars than the southern hemisphere. This is on that dichotomy boundary, and we don't understand why the entire northern hemisphere is that much lower. A lot of theories, but hopefully this will help us understand why that occurs. Breakthrough performance. This is the definition, for me, of breakthrough performance. These are the landing error ellipses I mentioned earlier for all the missions that the U.S. has ever put on the ground. The outside circle is Viking in the 70s. You can see the enormous size of that circle. What you see underneath it, I should have said this first, is actually Gale Crater. Okay? The red is the mountain in the middle. Red is high altitude, blue is low altitude. So it's like a moat, if you will, around that mountain that's in the center. And you'll notice, as we go down in time, Pathfinder, it gets smaller. Opportunity and Spirit, it gets smaller. Phoenix is smaller. But you'll notice this is the only mission that has ever been designed that could ever get into this kind of an area. We were not just pushing for a metric ton with a couple of 100 kilograms worth of analytical chemistry laboratory instruments on the surface, but we wanted to access places we've never been able to access before on this planet, and we did that. Why did we want to go there? This is why we wanted to go there. The mountain is off the chart, off the screen to the bottom right. The crater wall is up off the top left. That Peace Vallis line is actually a channel that runs off the top of the crater wall that's been cut many, many hundreds of meters, I believe, maybe tens of meters. It's a channel of runoff, like a river that ran off the edge and into the crater. And just like the Nile Delta, the Mississippi River Delta, an alluvial fan is where those kinds of rivers flow into larger bodies of water and they spread out. They get shallower, they get broader. That's what an alluvial fan is. That red area is a high albedo concentration that we saw from orbit, and we had no idea what it was. We didn't know why that area stayed hot all night long. And I'm going to show you why in just a second. But this is a really fascinating place to go. This is the crime scene. This is all the garbage we leave behind, plus the rover in the middle. And you can see how all the parts, they fall off, they got to go somewhere, and the idea is not to hit the rover with them. So that worked well. But the important part here is when you get down to where that alluvial fan and that red high albedo unit area is, you can see we have three very distinct boundaries here. We have a unit to the left that's kind of silty and hummocky looking, have a unit to the right that's very hard and crusty, and a unit to the top right that is very light. We are still trying to understand these, but there's an enormous temperature difference between these things. So our first point, instead of turning around and driving to the entry point of the mountain south of us, which is what the plan was, we said, man, we got to go find out more about this. So we said, let's go to Glen Elg. And the reason it's called Glen Elg is because it's a palindrome, and since we're going to drive right back where we started to get to the base of the mountain, the science team thought that was kind of fun. So the folks in Glen Elg, Scotland picked up on that, and we've had some fun with them too. And then there's a little depression here called Yellowknife Bay. That's where we are now, and that's where the drilling that we just did has occurred, and I'll show you a little bit more about that. But it's a very distinct depression right on the edge of this alluvial fan, quite interesting. So back to the landing for a second. So the timing of this was that the rover landed. As soon as it landed, it took an image from the rear hazard cameras. There's 17 cameras, so I'm not going to explain where they all are. I'll just use the terms for you. So we took pictures from the rear HazCam, took one picture from the rear hazard camera, and took a picture from the forward hazard camera and just blasted them on an omnidirectional antenna, hoping that either the MRO spacecraft or the Odyssey spacecraft would actually pick those images up. We weren't sure we'd get any of them, but we certainly only expected one at best. This is the first picture that came down. We were amazed that we got this. Pretty cool picture because you can see a wheel in the right front corner. This is also before the dust covers came off. So as soon as it landed, it just took a picture through the clear dust covers. And then we got a second picture. And we were amazed that we got a second picture. Now you can't see a lot. There's a lot of dirt and particles on this. But we took, within an hour or so, the team took that bottom picture and flattened it out. I'm sorry, we popped the dust covers first. Took another picture, flattened it out because they're fisheye lenses, and we got Mount Sharp. We were pointing right at Mount Sharp. I mean, that was unbelievable. And if you want to see something even more unbelievable, we'll talk about coincidence, and I hope you can see it. I'm going to put an arrow on it for you. There's a little feature on the surface that looks like a little mountain, a little peak. What that is the dust plume, the dirt plume thrown up when the descent stage that simply puts the rover down and flies off and crashes. When it hit the ground, we got a picture of the dust plume. I mean, that's just cool. That's all you can say. This is the rover. This is the business end. I'll talk a little bit about what we're actually doing there now because I'm probably running over here. But this is the instrument suite. We've got, as you can see across the bottom, a very international contingent aboard this spacecraft. Instruments primarily, however, the Spanish for the first time have provided us a high gain antenna for this. They also provided the meteorological station. but really, really solid and exciting international contributions to this mission. This is one of my favorite pictures. This is one of the early, I think this is actually the first pass we had the day after. I like this picture for two reasons. Number one is the first look really at the hardware that we got on the surface. The vistas are pretty cool. You can see the crater wall in the background, which is probably on the order of 12 kilometers away. But it's a huge crater, so those crater walls are probably a kilometer high or more. But this is another thing. I keep saying this is what makes this mission unique. Well, this is another one. That is what's called an MMRTG, a multi-mission radioisotope thermal generator. That's our power source. We are not solar powered. That has 4.8 kilograms of plutonium-238 in it that decays. And as that radioactive decay produces heat, we pull it off, convert it to electricity, and charge our batteries. So we have a permanent battery charger aboard. We have to charge batteries overnight. We use batteries for everything. So it's not driven by this device. That's a trickle charger. First time we've ever done anything to this extent. Viking had an RTG on it, but it wasn't nearly as capable. And it powered things directly, so they couldn't do too much. And you see other parts on here. There's a little sundial so we can figure out where things are. There's that big coffee can, which is one of our radio antennas. Below that, you see a row of dots. Those are calibration targets for some of our cameras, so we can calibrate our cameras and other things. And then there's these pictures, these high-resolution images that are coming. This one came from our mast cameras, which are up on the masthead itself. This is the turret. This is the business end of the arm. This is the turret. And what you can see is on the right, the thing that's got a little waffle weave over it is an alpha particle X-ray spectrometer built by the Canadians. We put it on a rock and let an active X-ray source bombard that rock, and we can determine what the chemical makeup of that rock is. On the left, this is important, you'll see three things sticking out. Two of those, the two outside ones, are actually the contact probes for the drill, and the center one is actually the drill with the drill bit installed. So when we drill, we take this and we set it down, and the contact points tell us how much pressure we're putting on the rock, because the arm actually presses on the rock to keep the drill engaged. Now what's interesting about this, what makes this a challenge and why it takes us long to do things, is the temperatures on Mars are so extreme that that arm actually stretches and shrinks by about 5 centimeters overnight. So it's quite significant. So as we're driving along, we landed in this alluvial fan area, and we're cruising along, and we're heading over to Glen Elg, and we see this. And it looks like a sidewalk, right? Broken pavement. Well, what's amazing about this is essentially a concretion. Now this came, and many of you may have heard about this. This is what's called a concretion. At the bottom of a river, as sediment comes in, it gets packed down. And over the years and more years and millions of years, it gets packed down to the point that it's almost like concrete. What's interesting about this is when you zoom in on it, what you see is not just a bunch of sharp-edged rock, but these are river pebbles. Look at how round they are. And they're embedded in the rock itself, the sedimentary, the concretion. So this plus a bunch of other material was what brought us to understand that this was actually a very active river. We're talking somewhere between ankle and hip deep, running at the speeds of streams we see, in the Rocky Mountains and other places. So a very vigorous flowing river over many millions of years to form these kinds of rocks and pebbles and these kinds of concretions. Amazing. First, hard evidence of significant river actions going on. Weather reports, we get these all the time. And what's interesting here is as we drove from our landing site onto that light-toned area where Yellowknife Bay was, the daily temperatures changed by about 10 degrees a day. That's how much different the terrain, how much difference in temperature the terrain can cause. A couple of points about instruments. This is the most fun instrument. May not be the most important, but this is a really fun instrument. It is the first time we've ever had a laser breakdown spectrometer on the surface of another planet. So up on the masthead, you see the camera, and basically it shoots a laser out. We can go up about 20 feet, about 9 meters away, and zap a rock. That laser plasmalizes that rock, and the spectrometer, which is the larger eyeball on there, actually reads that plasma, and we can tell what the chemical makeup of that rock is. So we don't have to drive over and put an arm on everything that we want to investigate. We can just sit here and zap stuff and decide exactly what we want to go investigate, which is pretty cool. And so you'll see down at the bottom right, the bottom picture is the before and the top picture is the after. You can see the 5 little holes there that the laser actually put into that rock when we zapped it. That's what we're doing. Unfortunately, what most people think we're doing is that. Now, maybe someday, but anyway. So this is another little tool on the end of the arm. This is a scoop. So before we ever take any drilled samples in, this little scoop, this is a sand dune in one particular area, not too far from those concretions. And we just scoop it up, and we have a series of sieves where we shake it and we rattle it and we get the grain size down, and then we dump it into the instruments. And there's ports on the top of the deck that take those samples, and we dump them into there, and then they get siphoned down into the SAM instrument, into the Chemin instrument. Breakthrough technologies and performance in space often doesn't translate into things for everyday use, but in these cases, we have some pretty amazing examples of how that actually has happened with this mission. What you see here circled in red is the Chemin instrument. What that Chemin instrument came from was a laboratory set like this. That's a typical X-ray diffraction instrument set here on Earth. SAM was even more significant in that the SAM system was probably 2 racks that size, and it's been shrunk down into a box as well. There are now suitcase-size Chemin-based instruments that are being hauled around in the field and used. In fact, Homeland Security now is looking at utilizing these as portable sniffers to tell whether illegal drugs that are being smuggled in, Border Patrol, I guess, will use them, as to whether the drugs are actually real or not, because it's just suitcase size. And we just found this out late in December, that this is King Tut's tomb. And this is a spin-off instrument from Chemin as well that's being used to analyze the paint, the chemical makeup of the paint that was used in ancient Egypt in these tombs. So we have some real spin-offs that are pretty darn exciting. And I'm sure that with SAM there's going to be more, especially in the medical industry. So as I wrap up here, this is where we are now. We're in Yellowknife Bay. We stopped over Christmas on that Point Lake, which is a high spot there, which is probably a meter or so, maybe 2 feet, 3 feet higher than the depression. And what we found in this area is an entire history of water in in Gale Crater and probably on the planet. We see sedimentary layers like this, which come from typically lakes where you have slow flows, not these vigorous rivers like we saw before, but slower flows where it builds dunes up on the bottom of a lake or on the bottom of a slow-moving river. And if you cross-section those dunes, you'll see that it lays sediment down like this over the millions of years. And we also find things like this. If you look carefully, you'll see there are white lines, white veins that run through these rocks. This is another era of water on Mars where you typically get groundwater that comes up through cracks in rocks, and you have things like gypsum form in those cracks. So we see 3 epochs of water. We see vigorous flowing rivers. We see areas where it was more stagnant pond-like areas, and then we see groundwater seeping from underground. And so this is probably the history of water on the planet Mars over several billion years, how it's changed. And now it continues to retreat into the form of ice. This is what we just did this, I'm sorry, I almost said we're getting ready to do. We have done another first. We have drilled the first hole by a robotic system on the surface of another planet. This is an area called John Klein. John Klein was the deputy project manager about 5 years ago who passed away unexpectedly. The science team likes to name things after friends and other things, and so John had the honor of this area being named after him. Those rocks I just showed you are all right in this area in Yellowknife Bay. The hole that was drilled, while not very big, a couple of inches deep, is an amazing first, and it's in a location that could tell us a lot about what the history of organic matter could be on this planet. Right next to one of those light-colored veins is where we drilled that hole. That material is now in the SAM and Chemin instrument suite and being tested. It will be amazing I'm sure, what the results are. This is really where we're going. So once all this is done, and if we can ever get the scientists' hands pried off of Yellowknife Bay, depending on what we find in those drilled finds, we may be there a long time. But the intent was to go here. This is much further south. This is the entry point to Gale Crater's Mount Sharp. So the mountain, as you saw, was pretty steep and it trails off. So down here is where we think we got a couple of paths to drive up. To give you an idea of how big these features are, that little white box in the center is blown up on the right-hand side, and that dark spot in the middle is essentially the size of the rover. So these are amazing mesas like we find in the southwest United States. Pretty incredible. This also shows at least two eras, a wet era and a dry era. As you go from the bottom of this picture going up, there's a very distinct change in the way the sediments appear. The first sediments from the bottom up, the first sediments are all very clearly waterborne, water-laid sediments. And as you get up above that, they are actually wind sediments from wind laying down and moving around the sand and the dirt. So we see the dry period and we see the wet period. Amazing history of Mars we're finding out here. And we haven't even really started. We've only been on the surface for 5 months. So, and we've got a year and a half to go at least. And that RTG will give us power for at least a decade, if not 2. So we really truly have changed the game. The benchmark is very different than what it was before. First guided entry, first mobile RTG on the surface, first analytical chemistry laboratory of this kind of capability on the surface, first long-lived rover, first system to put a metric ton on the surface of Mars. It has changed planetary exploration forever. It has. Will it take us here? President Obama has given the agency the challenge to get humans in the vicinity of Mars in the 2030s. Whether that means orbiting, whether that means landing on Phobos or Deimos, one of the moons of Mars, we're working on that. But to get in the vicinity, to get on the surface, I hope we can get on the surface in the 40s or 50s with humans. The things that Spirit and Opportunity did over there, well, Opportunity is still rolling, but over their 9 years for Opportunity, could be done by a human geologist astronaut in a matter of days. Because we roll slowly, it takes a lot of time so you don't break something, and so you know what you're doing. It takes a lot of time to make any of these actions happen. It's kind of like watching paint dry when it takes 3 days to drill a 2-inch deep hole, right? But we're used to that. Humans can do an amazing job at this. And that's where this agency ought to be going. That's where this nation ought to be going. And I believe the world is it's going to take the entire world's space agencies to do this and make that picture a reality. And we can do that in the 2040s. Without a doubt, we can do that in the 2040s. MSL took us a long way there. That can put cargo on the surface. It can put medical supplies on the surface. We've proven guided entry down to within a couple of 100 meters on the surface so you can resupply. It is the first step to getting humans to the surface of Mars. Thank you.